Start Broadcast button on the GoToWebinar control panel to allow all attendees to hear you. This system will notify you once you begin your broadcast.
Welcome everyone. Today is the day for us to have our quick wins in enterprise architecture for 2015 webinar. Welcome everyone. I really would like to get started and share with you quick wins the enterprise architect can use to gain traction and build momentum in 2015. And I'm sure that given the people that are with us today on this webinar, we've got a large amount of people that are already in an enterprise architecture program or are senior architects at their companies, and that you've already got a plan for 2015. And right now, I'm expecting that I may give you some tidbits that will give you something that you can adjust your programs. I'll answer to that at the very end of this webinar. But for the meantime, I'm Sharon Evans. Most of you already know me, otherwise you wouldn't have heard about this webinar. I am an enterprise architect, coach and mentor, and I have been doing this for 14 years now. So the first thing I would like to do is I would really like to give you an overview of what we're doing today. Why quick wins today? Again, I mentioned that you've probably already got a plan for 2015, but I'm guessing that some of the things that I'm going to mention to you today weren't in that plan. And I really sincerely want to give you some ideas so that you can win often and you can win early in 2015 and be really successful. I'm going to do that by sharing with you a case study. The one that I use to present to an organization or actually conference after I did my own personal experiment with winning early. And I also want to show you how learning like this through this webinar and this type of training can be different. I also want to show you how you can get more wins all of the time, not just once in a while, and share with you some critical tips for credibility, getting acceptance, building good relationships inside your company, gaining a sure footing within your program and for your program, reducing some of the pain that you might already be experiencing or facing, as well as gaining some visibility by those around you. And finally, after that, I am going to summarize this, this program or this specific piece of information for you. An enterprise architecture program, really does take a great amount of resources, dedication, and taking small steps and creating short-term wins is an important part of the winning strategy. So it is critical for you to build a solid footing for sustained growth of your EA program, and also for you to get confidence, gain acceptance and support from the business and sponsors early in your schedule. So this presentation will allow you to expand and augment your EA plan with tried and proven quick wins that will help you gain credibility as an enterprise architect and also give your program the momentum that you need to drive it to the next level. So let's move on. Today, I really don't want to spend very much time telling you about me. You have met me before, otherwise you probably would have heard this webinar. Again, I'm a speaker, author, coach, and mentor for enterprise architects. So onto my case study. This case study is basically a personal story. When I first presented this speech several years ago, and it's upgraded today, I did hold the position of chief architect, brand new, not to chief architecture, but inside of a company. My background before this was as a consultant, mentor, trainer, and speaker at my own company, Firefly Consulting. And prior to this, I had been an EA consultant for a mid-sized consulting group and a small boutique consulting firm. And so this company that I worked at was one of the largest property and casualty insurance companies in Canada. We had 11 branches in 11 provinces and also in two states. So we actually had two subsidiary companies. We were created in 1896 and we were owned by the policyholders. So not a public company. This is a $4 billion company, over 100 years old. So kind of unusual not to be privately owned. But we were, we had, these 2,500 employees, and we also had 197 full-time employees in IT as well as contractors. And what was unusual was that there was no enterprise architecture program. There was no real front end design and program, um, you know, role inside the company. That was the one thing that was unusual. Our customers loved us. They were, we could do all kinds of things that weren't exactly right, and they would still stick with us because they had for so many years. The company was built on its culture and its trust with its community. Our products were, a little bit different than what everybody else was selling. We would underwrite almost anything because we did it manually, and our technology was incredibly old and archaic. We were running almost everything, well, most things on mainframe. Very, very little was being done with what we call client server. So again, kind of an unusual situation. Now, I was brought in to participate in a great big program that was being run initially by the president of the company, who was frustrated by the lack of new technology. And he said it was one of the things that he hadn't licked, and he was about to retire. So he really wanted an opportunity to do that. We also had somebody that was externally brought in to run the program, and they brought in consultants as well. They brought in software that had been running on a Windows application for 11 employees, and they wanted to roll this out for all of these employees across all of these divisions in 2 countries. They also, this technology was brought in by a consulting firm who recommended that we take that Windows app and we layer it on top of Progress software, which is typically meant for manufacturing, as well as a Progress database, and then layer that on top of Oracle database. So, the very first thing that I saw after being in that organization for, about a week was that there's the way that they layered all this technology together was just absolutely crazy. I had never seen anything like this. And then what I also saw was the way that it had been broken down and layered and divided up. And it just was just an absolute Goliath of the size of the project. And I was being asked to participate and more or less do the architecture after the fact, as well as from the IT department perspective for a brand new CIO, create an enterprise architecture program. So I had a couple of real, challenging tasks at hand. But that's basically the story of this case study. Now, why did I have to win often and win early? If you take a look at this diagram, it's a roadmap, and it's basically what I felt like I needed to do to gain the momentum to be successful. As soon as I got in, I saw a very rigid and old style culture, and I thought, what am I going to do about this? And I grabbed a book early that was called The First 180 Days, and so I knew that I had to do some things quickly. And so my plan was really to gain credibility and increase visibility for myself and my program amongst my peers. So I had to get a bunch of people to trust me early, as well as an architecture team that I was going to build, and also for the key stakeholders. I also had to find a way to get acceptance for my ideas. And in order to do this, I had to increase the visibility of our architecture program amongst peers. And this was a non-existent architecture program. And I also had to get acceptance for the architecture team and the key stakeholders. I had to build relationships. I had to develop executive support by applying techniques such as incorporating a simple metrics, collection to prove business value inside the EA program. And I also wanted to develop some executive support in order to access the keys to alignment with both the business and the CIO strategy. So really what I was trying to do was leverage some simple tactics to kickstart an enterprise architecture program. Apply some quick incremental successes as a powerful strategy to keep people motivated and dedicated as we work through this. And so these are the simple tactics that I had to go forward with. I thought, okay, well, I'm going to have to gain and build a solid footing by modeling new behaviors. A lot of these people had never seen models before, and what I had to do was take some of what I stood for and then simplify that and scope it with each technology and with a plan for evergreen and reducing the overlap. I have to also wanted to make sure that I could reduce the pain that my organization was currently feeling in some way within the current lack of enterprise architecture or the technology plan. And then finally, I had to use that assistance to help me gain visibility in the organization for myself as well as my program. So we'll move on here. Some of the things that I felt like I had to do early was I had to get the business drivers as soon as possible. And this was kind of my primary goal in striving for credibility. So I did a lot of asking a lot of questions. I did whatever it took to get that information. So many people, when they get into an enterprise architecture program, they say the business drivers were hard. And I did what it took. Like I talked to my CIO and I said, can you show me any presentations that you've seen since you first got here? Can you take me to some of your meetings? I did some eavesdropping at manager meetings, meaning I listened, not so much, in a bad way, eavesdropping, but I really listened hard to what was being said, what kinds of things the managers were bringing forward, in their progress meetings. Um, I looked at the executive presentations and annual reports. And, my number one question became, what keeps you up at night? And I started at the very top. I went to the president and I asked him this question. Um, I had a meeting with him the first week that I was on the job. So that was helpful. I thought, okay, I'm going to take advantage. And then I had meetings that first week to listen to what the strategy was for the next year. I mean, we were in September and they were just coming out of a strategy session. So I took advantage. I asked them what kept them up at night. And, the president of the company was quite able to tell me his five biggest things that he kept a watch of. And so, those were things that were important to him. I actually did make a point of calling some branch and division heads and really finding out what really was getting an good understanding, and that allowed me to form a vision. A vision communicates where the organization's heading and how it's going to get there. So without a vision, the enterprise architecture program effort can easily dissolve into a list of incompatible projects, and I see so many companies do that. I look at the LinkedIn groups and take a look at what people are bringing up as issues, and almost all of the issues are very incompatible. It's just a list of challenges that they're facing. So those projects, they can take an organization in the wrong direction and sometimes nowhere at all. So in developing a vision for the initiative, the architecture team should really focus on the enterprise business drivers. What does the business want to achieve this year? This information can come from business managers, executive reports, quarterly or annual reports. The vision here is really to provide a front-end application on everything, an ability to quickly add sales staff and give them a reason to sell our product, or support staff in order to really improve customer service, whatever. Let's focus here on our strengths. And so for us, our strengths were customer service on existing products and creation of new products. To give our sales team the ability to sell, that was something else too. So, I was able to take that. Our experience at client sites confirmed that incremental successive 3 to 6 months in duration were powerful tools in keeping people motivated and dedicated to the cause. So, although the enterprise architecture is about continuous realignment with business goals, each phase of the process has to be treated as a project with an end in sight. So, taking small steps and creating short term wins is an important part of the winning strategy. So, I spoke to my CIO, and really what we did is we really communicated some of the really, it was basically low hanging fruit. and we tried to figure out real strategic ways to handle multiple problems in multiple organizations at the same time. So while creating those short-term wins, you have to remember that ultimately you must show value to the organization. It's commonly believed that the architecture initiative should begin to show value in no longer than 12 months. So at the best case scenario, a year from now, at the end of 2015, you should have shown value in what the programs were that you are striving to achieve next year. So onward to our next, my next topic. In gaining credibility, I really continue to do this by gaining more information. And I tried as hard as I could to keep my eye on the ball. So as hard as it was, because I was involved in that great big project, I had to keep focused on two things. One, that I had to create a real lightweight enterprise architecture program quick. I had to have quick wins, and as well, I had to do the best I could to re-architect that great big huge project. And I knew that that project couldn't be successful, but I had to keep my boss happy. And my boss could only be happy is if he showed that he was supporting that big project as well as he could. We had to have tangible goals for the company. And so a couple of things that we found in looking at what the strategy was for the upcoming year was really to assist the brokers. The brokers really were who were generating the money for the company, and they really needed some help with some of the digital means to which they were, using tools and also talking to customers. And we also had to alleviate some of the industry pressure. And industry pressure was really coming from, people wanting to do things online and get more information, as well as it was starting to be a bit of a commoditized business, especially in some of the provinces in which we operated. They really wanted to do online quoting for auto insurance, so we needed to compete with our competitors. So, to gain this credibility, within the business and the IT organization, I had to keep my eye on the ball and be really, really helpful with attacking some strategies for low-hanging fruit. So this is where early wins became my necessary strategy. My boss would be happy if I could help him with something that made him, the CIO, look good. And two areas that I could speak to right away, the agents and the brokers, they needed help. They were just dying for electronic assistance. And the industry was starting to demand it. So there were, tablets were out, people were trying to adjudicate claims on the scene. There were just some things that had to be done. Now our competitors were doing this poorly, so that gave us a chance to compete quite easily. Now, one of the things that I also focused on, here's a strategy that you may not think of often, but minimize for simplicity. So what that strategy is, most companies focus on adding new technology. This typically is what happens inside of architecture. What if you thought about removing it? So simplicity can be your key tactic. What stays and what goes? So if you take a look right now at all of the hardware and the software that you have licenses for, how much effort is being spent on managing those licenses? And now if you take a look inside your organization, you probably have two or three technologies, maybe even more, that are competing. They're a bottleneck because there are multiple ways of doing the same thing. And so really, where are these bottlenecks and what can you do? So if my CIO really wanted key information for his or her plan, so I needed to get him the information or get them the base information from a technology roadmap. So what was the inventory of the different things we had? And I'm going to speak a little bit more to that a little bit later. But really minimizing this was, one of my strategies. We really had to invest in, in strategic enterprise architecture outcomes. And so, to assist in the biggest pain points, we had to take a look at the visible areas. So, we had to make incremental success, and we're going to get acceptance in doing this through assisting people. So we took a look at all of the priorities that were across this entire company, and we labeled them A, B, and C. A were things that we had to do as quickly as possible, And then we tried to break them down even further. What can we do short term? What can we do midterm? And what can we do long term? We identified whatever misalignments we had and then chose a destination. Where would we really want to go with this? We really had to plan and design for some enterprise architecture metric gathering. Again, what this is that we needed some things to be able to talk to with the business. So when we started to say, how things were going, we needed a way of being able to show them the progress we were making. And sometimes that has to be done in advance, of what's going on. So, for example, if you're going to start recording some 3 key metrics, how long did it take to get information regarding a platform decision? How long did it take to make a technology decision? Before we started us, how long did it take? For various things. So again, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about metrics on a further page. But really, one of the things that we had to take a look at were things like doing 1 or 2 large projects. Doing some kind of preliminary survey to show the people involved that we actually cared for their input. There's a various metrics that the business, might care about. There's things like, discounted cash flow, net present value, what's the return on investment, internal rate of return, whatever. These are business terms, but they're things that you may have to get, learning as an enterprise architect. And speaking of that, I'm just going to get into, something about some of the large projects that we thought about undertaking. So we wanted to insert ourselves in key leverage spots, and one was in that great big project that I talked to you about in the case study. But we also took a look and we saw some plum projects that we could get involved in, and I'm going to go a little bit more into this in the next slide. But what we really had to do is really be focused in guiding, not doing the project. So that meant maybe creating some models or trying to invoke a project to do a little prototype, but it really was advising the group in really outlining the issues, gaps, and overlaps and opportunities for improvement. And so what we did is we took a look at all the potential, or the large projects that were going on as well as the large potential projects, and ensure that a plum or a candidate project would illustrate wins to stakeholders. So what we did is we had a program at the time where we had a bunch of people really needing to get information, a whole bunch of old systems that were using mainframe. So it just so happened that I'd had a recent experience in working with portals, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about that, but that was a plum project that we chose to focus on. The other thing that I really wanted to do was to choose 3 key metrics to focus on. And you'll notice that on this slide, there are 3 asterisks beside the title. That what I really want to do is highlight is that there's an awful lot more detailed information to come on this in future presentations and information, and I'm going to talk about that in a little while. But what I really want to do is I want to identify that there are, to choose about 3 key metrics that you're going to track while you're in this 180-day, 1-year journey to improve things. And think about what are the most important things in your company. So if you happen to be really focused on cost and efficiency is important, well then cost is going to be a metric, and you'll have to have costs of various things. Is it time? So if you're focused on innovation, well then time to deliver may be something that you're going to have to measure. Is it on your performance? Is this the business, the system, the service in your company? So choose 3 of these things that are on this, on this slide, and really focus on setting yourself up to collect metrics. How are you doing today? Set a baseline, and then what are you going to do 3 months from now, 6 months from now, just so that whenever somebody asks you, say, we used to behave like this, or our performance used to be this, and now it is this. So basically you're sharing. For example, on the compliance, so maybe it's number of systems and projects that are in compliance with enterprise architecture standards. So today it might be 0. But in 3 months, maybe you've got, okay, we've got these 3 projects, and now they are in compliance with using enterprise architecture approach. Or maybe it's some other legislation that you're tracking. What about governance? So maybe it's the degree of participation and adherence to governance in a certain area, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. Maybe it's business alignment. So what is the number and quality and completeness of business and IT capabilities delivered versus the target? So that's getting really detailed in more advanced architecture. But again, it's these are different things that we want to be keeping an eye on, and you also have to remember if you're going to measure them, you have to start setting yourself up in a position to measure them. Okay? So one of the other things that I really want to do is I really want to give you some tips and some quick wins with respect to relationships. And one of the biggest ones that you're going to create is if you happen to be reporting into the CIO's office, having yourself be viewed as a trusted advisor is a quick win. So think about the resources that you're going to target. Think about the team building that you're going to do. Think about some governance and some processes that you need to be getting cleaned up or added. What are all of these people that you're working with? What are their goals? If as far as your CIO is concerned, what is his goal or her goal? What are the messages that they are trying to convey? Really see if you can find out what those are, even if you have just a private conversation, and ask, if we're looking a year forward, what is the message that you hope that you would have given, put across to all of those that work for you? Think about how you can help. So potentially some of these messages that they want to deliver, they may not be in a position to do themselves, or they'll have a lot more credibility if somebody else is delivering them. So that might mean you have to get some FaceTime at a town hall meeting or whatever your group do to deliver broad messages to a large group. And often these kinds of meetings are quarterly. They're not, or sometimes they're month to month. But whatever you have to do to become that trusted advisor. Sometimes it is becoming your the technology, I want to call it dictionary, to your CIO. So making sure that you explain things that are being done in a technology perspective at a high enough level that they can understand and give them the word tracking they can use with their management. Okay? Now, something else that you can do is inside of your executive wins, you really want to get the CIO vision, and to do that, you may want to get their presentations that they've given to executives, find out what they've been saying, and glean some recurring themes. So if you can take whatever presentations you can get a hold of, see what's in common. And what you'll want to do is glean them and develop some sort of an elevator pitch for yourself. So by that, I don't mean, the standard pitch that maybe some people might think of when they talk about elevator pitches for sales, but think about what you'll say. If you happen to be the lone architect in your company, if somebody were to approach you in an elevator and say, hey, how's it going? Hey, Mr. Chief Architect, what are we doing these days? How are things going? What's the big project? What's your big vision? Make sure that you have something that you are in a position to say. So think about, being politically correct. Some of these things that you're working on, you may not be able to share. But think about the kinds of things that you would want to say. Again, you want to be thinking about making sure you understand what keeps them up at night, especially the executives in your company, and think about back to that metrics slide that we talked about. What kind of metrics can you be collecting for your VPs? Start simple. Think about, if you think about the person that, I'm thinking in my situation in that case study, there were somebody that if they asked me what was going on, I needed to speak to some metrics. So how many new policies we created last year? What's the current policy value or average policy value of our shareholders inside the company, our policyholders? Number of claims we made today by product. So average numbers of claims. Just some average numbers, but show that you understand the business that you're in. It's just something that you're going to have to do to be successful. So about your team, and this is something I like to focus on when I do my training and coaching. You have to create some sort of a team vision, and there's a way to share that. And really, what you want you to do is you want to have your team able to articulate what your vision is at any time. So, you'll have to communicate what your vision is and the process that you want to go through to achieve that vision, but you're going to want your team to be able to do the same thing. And something that you can do in order to gain credibility for your team is to hold open door meetings. And so, if you have a brand new EA program, it's going to be threatening to an awful lot of people. They will feel threatened because there are decisions being made that maybe they used to make themselves, but they also might think that you're in a closed door meeting making decisions about their fate. And the only way that you can prove that that's not true is that if you were to invite them occasionally, sometimes to some meetings, also to document your results, be able to share those and the minutes of those meetings for public view. So again, there's going to be some things that you don't necessarily want to expose, at certain times, certain delicate times, especially if there is a project, let's say, to downsize some technology and some people are worried they'll lose their jobs, or maybe that's the vision is that you will do with less resources. But, at least to be able to list those action items and make sure that they're documented somewhere so that if somebody is to ask, that you've got a copy of them. Now, speaking of um, your team may be small at the beginning, and you might be thinking about expanding it. So you're going to have, in some organizations, you'll have something called a virtual team. And if you've got a virtual team, that means that you've got some domain architects that participate in your enterprise architecture in, bits and pieces, or they do little projects. Think about the test assignments that you can give them. So a little bit later on, I'm going to start talking about a quick win in using um, a strawman enterprise architecture plan. Well, a great test assignment for, let's say, a technology architect that's not necessarily an enterprise architect yet, is to get them to help you doing some inventory. And so you end up having some templates. I'm going to share those in part of my training that I'm going to be talking about shortly. Um, but share those, and then get them to help you, and then assess their capabilities while they're doing that, because you always want to be on the lookout for more people to help you. So really, you really do want to convey to your IT organization that your team is not some elite group that's kept busy by figuring out somebody else's future. Your group should quickly publish the minutes of every meeting, if to nobody else, to your CIO and your management team. And remember, secrets serve no purpose whatsoever, not even when the team is considering outsourcing. So discussing the impact of your vision on people's positions, career paths, and future with the company is also an important part of the communication process. So let's move on. I have one slide. It's just almost like a little break, but I do want to share some information to you about what I'm working on before this webinar is over. And I am announcing a new group coaching program in January of 2015. I've already started documenting it on my architectcoach.com site. And so really what this is, and it's an affordable way to learn. It's an affordable way to make sure that you are a better architect at the end of 2015 than you were at the beginning. And so the way I'm keeping this affordable is that I'm keeping this in a price range that's less than $100 a month. And everyone's going to be exposed to 40 audios and videos on a monthly basis. You'll be able to get those on your time, not on mine. So they'll be available, and you'll be able to just go and take a look at them, as your time permits. And I'm also going to be providing a minimum of one live webinar each month. And it'll be on a new topic, something that will be quite timely. And also, I'm going to give you the ability to ask questions and answers and learn from other people that are in this group. I'm also going to share enterprise architecture templates and some training materials, so that you're getting almost like getting bonus information all the time, and stuff that's going to help you improve your program. So all of this information is at architectcoach.com, and if you take a look at the coaching tab, you'll see a group coaching tab, and that's going to be portraying full information. You'll see this most likely by Monday, um, December the 22nd. So I may have it a little bit earlier, but that's what I'm aiming for. So you take a look at that. Okay, back to our regularly scheduled program. So another quick win is really to focus on key projects. I mentioned these before. Um, these are basically solving your big, hairy issues. So find out what the big issues are in your company, and if you can, find out who's responsible for solving them. And that'll give you at least a starting point. Hopefully, you can find some common points of failure across your company, and maybe what you can do is you can, you know, figure out what the biggest risks are and costs, and then see if there's any way that there are some package solutions or services as an option. So again, I mentioned before earlier, we had a whole bunch of issues that people were experiencing. And because I had seen a solution that solved a lot of those issues in the past, I suggested that we actually bring in a portal solution. And I'm not saying that you can do any of these things instantly, but what we did is we started the ball rolling in just really floating some trial balloons and talking about potential for bringing in a solution like that. And actually, within that first 6 months, we were able to start issuing some tenders to some potential vendors, determine what our criteria would be, and actually address some of the issues with the VPs. So we were in my case study, it talked about a great big project we were working on, but it was very conveniently forgetting about multiple departments in the company. I walked into a company that had absolutely zero HR solutions. We had one human resource employee, and that was the VP of the company. We had, we were up. It was up to us to do our own hiring. Um, there was also some issues where brokers, where they were trying to get claims information back to their claim holders or their policy holders, and they couldn't do it. So really, a solution that showed a way of putting a user interface type layer on top of archaic, or sorry, all old legacy systems, is a better word than archaic. That happened to be a good solution, and there was a lot of interest in that. So, one of the other things that may be big ideas that you might have is some way of providing some backfill or finding some backfill or outsourcing some legacy support. This is a big idea that maybe that we came up with to try to solve one of these big hairy issues where we didn't have the support for people working on some of these big new projects. Really, the enterprise architect is hopefully one of their biggest roles is gaining some fresh perspectives on some old problems. Okay, so still on that key project, one package solution. So potentially one package solution can solve many needs. I've seen this in the past, years ago, with people that brought in ERPs or enterprise resource planning tools. In our case, it was basically a portal for broker and portal access, as well as some insurance coding, also to solve some HR communication issues, basic content management. So we were able to aim to solve one key business executive need, but we had two or three that were supportive of that business executive when they started looking for the money for that project. So I just really wanted to mention that may or may not be something that you can do. Now, something that I intend to fully do inside that group coaching that I talked about was showing you how to create a strawman enterprise architecture plan and really a framework for doing so. So a little diagram on your right just shows basically a pictorial of a framework that I typically teach, just at the very base level. But really what we wanted to do for the straw man was create a baseline assessment, as for the enterprise, as well as some guiding principles. We really did a mining expedition of the existing artifacts. We really went and knocked on the doors of all of the people inside the IT organization as well as business. and looked for business process models. We looked for technology diagrams. We looked for lists of things that they, their asset inventory. So we basically did a full technology inventory, and we just put a time limit on it. So because this was strawman and real high level, we put a time limit, and we really collected this information, and I had a few people helping me do this. We were able to then create some priority focus areas as well as get some people started on a technology roadmap. My CIO, that was his biggest goal, was to get some sort of a technology roadmap because he said, I don't even know what I have. And my goal really was to create some transition plan for the first 180 days. So what I really wanted to do was implement some processes inside the company. I also had some additions and some confinement to kind of what was going on. So I basically wanted to draw basically put a box around what we already had and figure out how are we going to make that better. Something else that is often a big win is, using crisis as a major opportunity to gain credibility. So maybe you want to think about some of those key projects. What's the biggest area of pain? Now, maybe inside the project, what's the biggest area of pain? So I mentioned before that finding backfill for some key resources, that might be a big piece of pain. What can you improve with nearly 100% certainty? So we had seen, a vendor that had a solution for essentially just, it was out of the box. They did everything. We used very little of our resources. And it was basically a way of basically taking an old technology we're using and relayering it, and having their own solution do it. And it was very inexpensive, but it was, we had a crisis because the technology and hardware we were using behind the solution was archaic and it was out of date, it was out of support. And so that was a crisis. I mean, to me, that was one of our biggest crises because it was a major system that could have gone, out of support. So what we really wanted to do is identify some options, offer some opinions, and then at the time, my favorite little 3-word um, statement or positioning was decipher, decode, diffuse. So really take a look at what that opportunity is and really break it down in a simple to understand manner. Really decode it so that maybe business people could understand why it was critical to find some sort of a solution and diffuse it. Really, make that not such a big problem. Assist those around you and really making sure that you really played a good political game while talking about the problem. So, I mean, as much as I'd love to have, I really talked about how crazy it was to have allowed the system that was without support on hardware as well as software for that to happen. I couldn't say that. I had to really position what we wanted to do as really being of assistance. Um, you know, there's just basically listing some options and some guarantees, or sorry, some recommendations. Really doing a little bit of what ifing, and so that we could get some people to follow us in what we were doing. Another big win, take a look at your governance programs. So if you have governance in your organization, good for you. My guess or my supposition would be that it's not really broken down into the details that you need to actually do something about it. So if you think about the different behaviors your organization is performing on a day-to-day basis, here's 4 different examples of different layers of governance. So, for example, is your data governance, are you able to identify either a person or a process for performing your data governance? So, an example I'd like to share with you is from a former project that I worked on, in which I had a very senior role in the data side, and the organization that I was with, they had something they called reference data. They had an information technology systems, that were based on, um, the more modern server-based versus mainframe, but they shared reference data. And so we needed a person inside the organization to take ownership If the value had to change, who was going to take ownership of who made the decisions? It wasn't IT to decide. So we had to make sure we had a program of governance. What was our program for test data? So if we were to use test data for testing a new application, how did we get it? Did we use live data? Did we take data and we adjusted it so that we couldn't ever read anything that was real? We protected the information of those behind the data. What was our process for data persistence inside of our system? So again, that's just an example. Things like procurement governance. Basically, how did we go about making hardware requests? If any person in any department, asked for a new uh, handheld device, did they get one, or did we have a process and some method for determining whether or not they could have such a thing? Um, did we have a need for some central design authority? So somebody that established and monitored the standards, the policies and guidelines for the enterprise architect or the architecture wide. How did we do performance reviews? So these were just some governance examples. Take a look. Is this something that needs to be on your radar early in 2015? And what can you do about it? I'm sure that you've seen issues that you've had a challenge in focusing on. So something else that's a quick win. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into an organization and I've asked to see the standards and they can't show them to me. And if this is you, if you have no existing documented standards, base these from the minute you start 2015 in January. Base these on decisions that you make. So make sure that somebody is dedicated to documenting the decisions you make and then taking whatever is related to the standards as you make these decisions and putting those into a standards book. So an example, I was asked, I don't know how many times in the first month of being in that company, I was asked to help people decide whether we're going to use an enterprise service bus or SFTP or NFS. We saw these different messaging, approaches all over the company, but we had to take an approach. We had to say, okay, for everything that was going to be on client server based, we're going to use this technology. Anything that's using, some things that were related to banking or things that were related to mainframe, this is how we're doing this. So, that's just an example. Many companies don't have a standard for ad hoc reporting. And so a standard that I implemented for one of my customers was I said, okay, that's fine that you guys are all, you're running things in Access or you're running things, God help me to say that again, or in Excel, or you've bought some kind of ad hoc reporting tool. So who's going to get to run those reports? So if this is going to be run on live data, what are you doing? So I put in a mandate that a script had to be evaluated before we could run this on live data. And as well, we had to have a copy of it and a copy of the output and a copy of the results. So these are just some of the standards that we, this is years ago. So again, whatever it is you need to do, what's the standard on creating or selecting a new product? What's your assessment process? What is your, your vendor evaluation approach? Um, all of these kinds of things can be held, if nothing else, by maintaining a decision book. And I like to do that and share that with people in my coaching programs. Just give them a baseline. I like to keep a short form, so that's something that's a quick decision and you don't have time to document fully. You've at least got something in writing, as well as a longer format version. Okay, so a part of these behaviors that you really want to model and demonstrate, um, think about this. If you are trying to do quick wins, simple's best. And so if every time you to sit down and evaluate a decision, maybe it's your degree of reasonableness. If you are the architect and you're brand new, it's so tempting to say, okay, we're starting all over again. Everything's going to have a model. Everything's going to be redesigned. We're all going to have these standards. Let's look about what's reasonable. You are inside of a program that's in flight. So what are you doing to make sure that you measure and you demonstrate a degree of reasonableness? If you were to categorize your technologies, and let's say you put them in different categories, what is the kind of decision making for each of those technologies? What is the kind of documentation? What is the kind of review process when you make changes? So essentially what I'm saying is that you want to be inserting some sort of an architecture process into an existing process that you've got. So, whether you're standardizing some complicated processes in your company, whether you are working on technology selection as an example, or change management or risk management, what can you do to apply the architecture process into the way you're doing it today? So, are you doing a current state evaluation? Are you doing target state? Are you doing a gap analysis? What kinds of things are you doing to show others, look, we're taking the architecture approach on this. We're taking the architecture approach. Something else that I promised that I really wanted to go through with you today is lessons that I learned. Again, this might sound like I was just incredibly successful in just starting off with my idea of how to do quick wins. That's not true. There's all kinds of things that I did that I really love you to learn from. And one of those things is that I made all kinds of incorrect assumptions. I assumed that when I told a big, huge team of people that there was no way that this technology could ever work. I thought, okay, well, you guys just didn't know this. What I did not know is that I didn't think about all of the people who had staked their careers on choosing those technologies. And if it wasn't even that, there were people that had said all along that it would be difficult. But what about the people who whose careers were at risk because they hadn't waved the same flag I had? So there were all kinds of assumptions that I made, and again, it's because of who I previously worked with. The next one was really the adjustment that that I hadn't made with the culture. Um, this organization was an incredibly older organization. They had a whole bunch of things that they did that were very, very old style. And they were used to just flying under the radar. They weren't used to applying new money, new ideas, and especially not an architecture process. So they were used to they were used to throwing people at it, human resources, and they just really weren't used to some of the things that I wanted to do. I had to adjust to that kind of culture. I was used to working in a whole bunch of agile organizations. So this was new to me. Organizational barriers. So there were some things that I thought should be, relatively simple to, you know, to approach. Well, that wasn't necessarily true. Really, it's easy to recognize, or it should be easy to recognize, that enterprise architecture is really about change and continuous realignment with business drivers that change. And so, in order to, change is not an easy issue to deal with. With change comes barriers, and organizational as well as technical. IT and business executives must be prepared to deal with both, and so should the architect. Failure to recognize and respect organizational barriers is probably one of the worst mistakes that any architect or IT manager could make. So it's often the primary cause of some project failures as well as budget and time overruns. So I've seen many elegant technical strategies find a permanent resting place on an old dusty bookshelf because the engineers who devised them failed to build the consensus that was required to deploy their fine intentions. So, as far as the organization goes, you have to understand how they operate. There's all kinds of barriers to change. When change bites people, they bite back. And so, in developing an effective enterprise architecture approach, the first step is really to prepare to address the barriers to change, and then to take positive steps towards establishing trust and opening the lines of communication between IT and the business units. Business managers and IT staff should actively participate in the process. Um, well, it's difficult sometimes to get all the parties to the table, and a strong consensus must be reached. as to the importance of the entire effort and the outcome. So really, I walked in and I had been a problem solver, and I had to constantly remind myself that failing to focus on my primary objective, which was to make my CIO look good, build an EA program, and then finally to support the re-architecting from the back end of this project that had been started way before I showed up. I also had to keep remembering that I was not a project manager. I had a project management background, or I had done that work, and I was dealing with a lot of really green project managers, people that were dealing with projects that were impossible to succeed as. Um, I also really was an elite techie, and that's one of the things I talk about in my book. You really have to remember not to take on that lead techie role. When you're in the architect's chair, you can't sit down and getting into problem solving mode by putting your hands on the console. In the end, visibility was critical, and you have to do what it takes to move your EA program forward and to gain traction. So for 2015, ideally you are starting with some momentum, but keep feeling that the momentum is building. And if you can put something together and adjust your plan for 2015, that will allow you to build momentum across the year and really do that through encouraged behaviors of those around you. I believe that you will find some great success. So as I conclude this webinar, what I really want to do is I want to give you the opportunity to ask questions and answers, and I can give you some answers. And so what you can do is you can type some questions into the chat box to the side of this webinar, and I will, while you're typing these questions, I'm going to advance the slide while you're typing, and that's just going to bring me to my last slide. I just wanted to have this showing on the screen while I do answer those questions, just so that anyone who needs to write it down or to take a look. I do my work in multiple places, and Zoom Factor Book is in one. Architectcoach.com/group coaching. That's where all of the new material and the new program is going to show up. And here's my contact info. So again, if you don't already have my book, you can get it at Zoom Factor Book. There are going to be some other updates coming to that book, both into the back-end resources as well as an audio version and as a workbook coming up. So the cool questions. So again, what people, one of the questions people asked me when I talked about this quick wins presentation originally, they said, how would you pause something that's already in motion if you've got these ideas for quick wins? And my answer to them is that you're going to have to bring those impacted by pausing that plan up to date. So for example, when I arrived, at that organization and really started the EA program, I had to have a weekly update meeting with the CIO once a week and let him know what I really wanted to change, and also that I had this strawman EA program that I was creating it, so that he could understand when I started asking people for their time to help me create the inventory details, that they would be allowed to have that time. Okay, I've got another question. I've got a question that says, how does this work, or how does an EA program work when or if the EA function is not located in IT? And I'm going to answer that as best I can, as if I understand this question. And if I don't quite get this right, you can clarify that in the chat box while I answer. But I guess what I'm looking at is I've dealt with organizations that had a strategic planning group. And so enterprise architecture fell in their group. And again, specifically, last summer, I did a big project for multi-billion-dollar global organization that really wanted to implement enterprise architecture inside their U.S. company. They had companies all around the world, and what I really had to do was to help them figure out how to start this program. And it was two business people. It was the VP of marketing and the VP of sales that decided that they would like to be the stakeholders for the enterprise architecture program. And when we were done, they were asking questions about how do we implement this program, and having it sit and rest under the CIO was not something that they were interested in doing. They felt that would get a lot more traction and a lot more belief from other departments as if we were to put it inside their strategic planning department. And they just so happen to have one of those. So on clarification, what happens if, yeah, so if you don't have this in the IT organization, and you want to move it outside of there, that's another situation. You may have to move your enterprise architects outside into the strategic planning division. Again, you're going to have to take a look at what's possible and think about who the stakeholders are in your organization for the CA program. So I think that that's all the questions I have for today. I'd really like to thank those of you. Thank you, Jeff, for bringing up that really good question at the end. If any of you have questions besides what you've heard today, or let's say you're listening to this as a replay, if you go to any of those sites, Architect Coach or Zoom Factor Book, and you click on the contact, and you actually type into that free form box where you can add your question, I'd be more than happy to answer the question, and I would fulfill that by creating some sort of a little video and answering the question and fulfilling the answer by sharing the links to that video going forward. Again, so I'd love to remind you, go and visit us at architectcoach.com/group-coaching, and let me know you're interested. If you really want to do that again, I want to wait till Monday. There should be some way for you to start signing up for that, and I do really want to. The reason I've waited is I really want to make sure there's some nice bonuses for you when you do decide to join me in that coaching. For those of you that I may or may not see before or speak to before the end of this year, I really would like to wish you a very safe and happy holiday season, however you do choose to celebrate that, or a nice rest if maybe you aren't celebrating that. And also, if you aren't resting and you really are getting to work during the holidays, maybe you can join me next week on some further webinars. As well, I wish you all the best in 2015. Take care. Have a good day, everybody. Thanks for joining me.